So this is the login page for every customer. Their logo can be inserted, and obviously when the tenant is created, you would have the name of the tenant. There are 3 ways that you can log into the system. The one is using an account, an email address, which then gets a one-time PIN. The other one is SSO, using your Microsoft account, which can also have MFA enabled, so users can use MFA. And the third mechanism is an MFA that we've built, which gives every user a unique PIN. And along with that PIN and their email address, they will then get a one-time PIN to add to that and log in. So essentially 3 mechanisms to log in, and you have the ability to force those mechanisms. So if a customer only wants to use the SSO with Microsoft, we have a place, and I will show that in this demo where that is able to be done. For purposes of the demo, I'm using an account with a one-time PIN because it's a shared mailbox. And please note, because we have roles-based access control, I'm logging in as a root administrator, which will give me access to view everything in the product. We have roles-based access, which means you can create a role in the system, assign it to a user or a group, and through that, you then have different access to different elements of the platform. This is very important when it comes to compliance. Now, the way that roles can be allocated, I will go into detail. They can either be allocated to an individual or to a group, and we can manage users and groups in different ways, and I will explain that as I go in more depth. So I'm inputting an account and hitting continue, and I will get an email now, which I will share what that looks like on the screen, so we have that for those purposes. We'll just take a second to receive it. And I've received it, and I'm going to pull it across so you can have a look. The email looks something like this, and it will show me my verification code, which I'll copy. And then I will paste that verification code in and log in. The first and main page that you will hit when you log into the system is a dashboard of widgets. These widgets are controlled by your role. So depending on your role, one of the permissions you can allocate to a role is the ability to view certain widgets. And whichever widgets are available to you when you hit the add widget button, that's what you'll see available to be able to drop to your dashboard. And if you wanted to remove one, you can remove one. And these widgets also have some filters within them. So if you wanted to see a little bit of info, but something important to note, these widgets are based on recorded calls. We also have a widget which tells you how much storage you have from the Numonix blob storage, as well as if you're using transcription, it should keep a record of how much transcription you've bought or purchased in advance. Now we're going to go directly to settings before we go into the product. And some of the things in settings that are important are roles. And this is what I meant by roles-based access. You can create a role by simply adding the role, name, give it a short name, create it. And then when you go into the role, you can go and add permissions to that role. I'm not going to go through all the permissions. There are a ton of those permissions. They're pretty self-explanatory, but there are permissions from allowing people to view the call listing page, allowing people to apply legal hold to a call, which I'll explain what that is, allowing someone to share the call either externally or internally, make comments to a call, make updates, changes, etc. So you can create a role by simply adding or removing permissions. And then once you have the role, you have different ways that you can assign that role to people. So in this case here, in this demo system, and I will show you another piece of another one, we're not using Active Directory sync or Entra to sync users. We're doing manual user input. So if I go into the user screen, you also see I have the ability to add a user in the system. Now, the email address within adding a user is the one that the user will use when they log in, the one that will be associated with Active Directory, the one that they'll get their email one-time PIN to, that'll go in there. On the initial launch of the product, you have the ability to also import users through a template, which is available here as well. Now we can see I have users in here. We have different states of user. There's an active user or inactive user or disabled user, and you can also you can filter based on active or disabled users. Now, important also to note is if I go to a user, and this is the account that I've logged in with, as I hit the user page, I'm able to see what role this user has, so what level of access. You can see these are grayed out, and that means that this role has been inherited from a group that I'm in. So I mentioned you can assign a role to a group. This is exactly the case where I'm in a group that has the root administrator role assigned to it, and I've inherited it. So when I go in here, even though I'm a root admin, I cannot remove this role because it's been inherited through a group. The only way that I can remove this role is if I'm removed from that group. I can, however, add additional roles or remove them if I'm doing it through this section itself. The next tab is targets. And this is if someone is a recorded user, you would typically see their target, which has to be associated with them to be able to synchronize to the integration that they're being recorded with. Playback permissions. This is where this specific user, and you can do it on a group basis as well, where this specific user, who they have the permission to view and playback. So in this case, you can see by user, this user doesn't have ability to playback Anthony, but because they're a root admin, I can add that if I need to, and so forth. You can also add by group. So you can say, okay, instead of having to manage it by multiple, if you have a supervisor, this supervisor, I want them to listen to this group's calls or that group's calls. So that can be configured on a bulk action, and you also have the filters available here to search through it. Groups, this will tell you which group this person is in, which is root admin. If you click it, you'd go and see that group. And that's the group they're in, and hence why those roles were inherited through the root administrator group. Two other features here, and I mentioned earlier about permission on legal hold. Now, there's something we have in our platform called profiles, and profiles are attributes that you can assign to groups that users in those groups will take on. We have three profiles. We have retention, we have security, and we have recording. The first one, retention, which I'm going to refer to now, and the others I'll come to later, is the ability to, by group, say how long you want that group's calls to be retained in the system. Otherwise, they'll be, and then afterwards, sorry, they'll be deleted. If no one, if a user doesn't have a retention profile, their calls are kept indefinitely. So what happens is if you've set up a retention profile, for example, for 6 months, and someone realizes that this user's calls should not be deleted for a time period, you can place legal hold on that user so that all of their calls will not be purged when the call hits the specific time frame of the retention. As soon as legal hold is removed, the next retention run, those calls that have reached that time period will be deleted. Another good feature here, and sorry, one other thing on legal hold is the ability to assign legal hold also to an individual call. So that's actually a more flexible option that a lot of customers use. And that's when, for example, they uncover there's a problem call that might go for legal action or a good call for training that they want to retain. They would just place legal hold on that call. Another good feature is called playback reason. Now this, when enabled for a user, or it can be applied to a group, what it does is when anyone has the permission to play back this user's calls, they will be required to write a reason why they're playing back the calls. And I'm going to show that in this demo as well. We're going back now to the settings page, and I mentioned groups or users. Now, if there's someone is using Active Directory Sync, this will be all shut down so that you cannot add a group manually, and the users and groups will automatically be synchronized through Active Directory, so no user can be created within the system. Now in this one, I've created groups, and simply adding a group, you type the name and the group would appear over here. And then what would happen if you go into the group, you can then go and add users to the group. Again, if you're using Active Directory, those users will be automatically imported in. Now, important, all users in this group will take on the attributes that are assigned to this group. So for example, some attributes, playback permissions. Who, if this group has a role or a profile, security profile, that will enable them to log into the system and access the call listing page, they can then be assigned users or groups they can listen to. So if it was a supervisor group, we want this group to listen to Anthony's calls, or we want this group to listen to the Charles White test calls. So you can assign, so as I showed you in the user page, where you can do it by user, you can do it by group as well. You can also assign the call playback reason to this. So anyone in this group here or in this record all test group, if anyone wants to play back their recordings, they will be required to input a reason why they're playing it back. And we have a trail, an audit trail or call playback log where people can review what calls have been played back alongside that reason, and that can be exported to a report as well. The next feature here is a setting. Now, this is important because we have the ability to assign people to listen to their own calls through users, which can be pretty cumbersome if there are huge groups of users. In this case, what we can do is if people are in this group and you apply a yes to that, it will mean that everyone in this group has the ability then to listen to their own recordings. But remember, they do need a role to be able to log in and at least access the call listing page. The next tab is profiles, and probably the most interesting. And what profiles are, as I mentioned, these are attributes that can be assigned to the group. And we had the three. We had retention, we had recording, and we had security. You can simply add a profile in here. So we have a recording and a retention, but if I wanted to add a security profile, I could simply do that, add the profile, and now the attributes of the supervisor security profile would be there. And I can also remove it if I wanted to remove it. We're now going to move to those profiles and explain what they are. So here, if I go to profiles in the settings page, I can see a whole lot that have been created, and we can see retention. So I've created 28-day retention, 30-day, 4-year, 45-day. It's really simple. Add a profile, go to retention, give it a name, how many days you would like that to be. And then also we have the ability to say only retain calls if they're longer than a certain duration. Now, in that case, what this means again is if this 28 days assigned to a group, when someone in that group makes a call and 28 days later, on the 29th day, that call will be deleted out the system. But remember, unless legal hold is on the call, it will be deleted. If legal hold is on the call or the user, they won't be deleted. The other type of profile is a security profile. And that security profile is in essence adding a role to a profile. So in this case, in the MAR22 admin one, we have root administrator role, which means that this profile has the attributes of a root admin. And if this gets added to a group, it means that that group will then have the root administrator role. The final profile is the recording profile, which is the most interesting and most complex. And that is the ability to determine how groups or a tenant records. And this involves whether someone needs stereo because they're going to be using transcription. The minimum for transcription is A-Law, MU-Law, 8,000 hertz, whether they're going to go for the highest compressed, which is GSM 8,000 hertz, or whether they want PCM stereo 16,000 hertz, which is the ability to split the waveform into RX, TX, so you can mute either side of the conversation. Either one has its benefits for customers, depending on their requirements. Also, you have the ability to determine whether someone wants to record their screen sharing recording or their video recording. Some of the other features in here is to turn an announcement on and off for Microsoft Teams recorded calls. This is an announcement we call from Microsoft, not very flexible. A customer can turn it on and off, and this is where they can enable transcription either for the tenant or for a specific group. Now, one other thing also to note, the screen recording and the video recording also, and the compression is only applicable to Teams. If we're doing hybrid, the recording profile is not applicable. Recording profiles are only applicable to Teams integrations. The other features in the recording profile is to be able to turn on the native recording app in Teams. And that app looks as follows. And the reason I have all three options in here is because in my profile, all three are turned on. But if it was turned off, you would lose access to one of these. So this controls this app that you have for record on demand and for other features that you might want to use. There are some other features here, like the ability to record a user only, even if they're the only person on a call. If this is off here, it would be recording only if they're more than one party on a call, as well as we have multiple segments hold, which is if someone's placed on hold, they can either see it as one call or it can be split into two calls, and that can be enabled through there. The other things which requires, I'm not going to go into great detail, but that requires a session in itself, is the ability to filter recordings. So what happens is you can say, for example, no internal calls recorded, PSTN calls recorded only, online meetings only, and then further filters like targeting calls by ACD queues, by dialed numbers, by other criteria. And the same applies to meetings, whether you want to filter by and only record meetings by an organizer. Perhaps you want to only record a meeting that contains a certain word in the calendar invite, like record, or not record a meeting if it has a word like, for example, private in the title. And you can make multiple dependent terms. So you can add a filter and say only if it's organized by a specific person and the word private, then don't record it. And then the final is an external participants only, which only will record a meeting if there are external parties on that call. The other thing to note is billing, and this is where licenses are assigned. So you will see the licenses for the specific customer within the licenses. Typically, there's only one. There's a store or two, storage and the license and analytics if there is. And within here, the license, when you click on it, you can either assign licenses to individuals or you can assign it to groups. The preferred mechanism these days is by groups because it's easier to manage the system, especially if you're using Active Directory Sync. When someone is then inserted into a group through Active Directory, they will automatically take on a license. But I will show that to you when I log into the other system. Going now into one other part in settings is authentication. This is when I mentioned in the beginning that the user has the ability, or you can force someone to log in a certain way. You can turn on single sign-on only or MFA only, and then that will only allow them to log in those specific ways. Another relevant piece is storage. If a client wishes to use their own blob storage account, that can be configured through here, and depending which mechanism they want to connect to the container with SAS services, so use the delegation SAS with which token, they can input that and then connect to their own storage account. Targets, these are the recorded targets. So when a user gets created, if they're a recorded user, they would have to have the applicable target that they're being recorded on, as well as the endpoint that's associated. Now, what an endpoint is, endpoints are the mechanisms of connecting integrations into a single user tenant. So we have the ability to connect multiple integrations or multiple Teams bots into a single customer's tenant, and that is done through an endpoint where you would create those endpoints, assign them to a target, and then that target would be looking at that specific bot or endpoint to gather that user's calls for them. You also would connect the Open API through that space as well. Going back to the settings page, you also have other features like an audit trail in here to view, but I'm going to also show you the playback log and the call deletion in a little bit when I've gone through the other page, as well as the shared calls and downloaded calls. I'm going to go to the call listing page now, and this is where you would search for calls. Now, I am only able to see the calls that I have permission to see. You'll see the current day's worth of calls, and you can see the calls in different formats. You can see here Jordan Myers, he's the targeted users. This is a user. This is a meeting. You can see the subject of the meeting. You can see who the organizer was and the participants, and you can see there was only audio on that call. We can also see here was a peer-to-peer call from Jordan, inbound call, the extension, who the caller was and the caller name, and the duration of the call, and again, only audio. So that was a PSTN call. Depends on the integration, might look different ways. You can also search for calls by different criteria. So if I want to go back and look at yesterday's calls as well, I can do that. And you can do a date range and time range as well as an agent. So if I wanted to look only, for example, for my calls, I can do that. And it's because I only have permission. I have permission to see it. I can see it over here. So I can see my calls as well, and I can remove the filter as well. You can search by a ton of other filters. This you can go through: caller name, number, inbound, outbound, the type of call, whether it was a meeting or a call. If there's a delete status, I'll mention what that is in a little bit. The title of a meeting, if someone has added a comment to the call after the fact, and then filter like priority, There's the priority, low priority. So if you want to filter by low priority calls, you would check that as well. And you can export the results of this search to a spreadsheet that would also include the PBX call grid, which is a useful troubleshooting mechanism. This search field here is if someone is using transcription, they're able to, on a global search through the transcription record to be able to find keywords. Now, again, in this call, you can see there's screen sharing as well. Further, if I want to play back a call, I can simply drop that down, hit the playback button or skip forward, and it's going to stream the call back through the system. If someone has the reason for playback like I do, and let's see if I can find a call of mine, if I hit the play, now it's going to be showing demo, and I will hit playback and it'll now only play back that call for me. Now, interesting also to note there are other features as well within the platform that users can use, such as download the audio to a WAV file. Now, this is a role permission. If someone does not have that role permission, they wouldn't see this here. But if you do have it, it clicks it and downloads it in an unencrypted WAV file. Download package. If there's audio, video, screen sharing, it would download the package with those media files in it. And then the shareable link is a really valuable feature, which allows you to share the link to a call that they can access without having an unencrypted call. What's also nice about this is you have the ability to choose only to share a part of the call. Now, this call can be shared in different ways. Internally, which means the person you're sending the link to needs to have an account in the system. Or you can share it externally, which means they don't need an account, they just need this password. You can also specify how long a call the access is available for. Endless, we have some customers who use that because they might want to add it to a CRM application or any ERP that someone can then at a later stage just access the call quickly. But in essence, we've now are going to share this for 1 hour, and that's the password, and we're going to write here demo again and create the link. Now, you have the ability to restrict that someone cannot share it via an email, so they only see the shared link. So I'm going to copy the shared link. And now what I'm going to do is if I open a new incognito window, let's say I click the link, let's say I forwarded it to someone, I'm going to open the link. I'm going to grab the password for the call. And I'm now going to see that that's a password protected link. I've shared no encrypted data. I'm now not a robot. We're going to do our captcha on this piece, and we're going to verify and view the call. Now, this is really unique because you're able to now access the call without sharing an unencrypted file. And if I click anywhere and hit the play button, it's going to jump and only play back that area of the call that is highlighted. Now, another important piece is I mentioned when we were in the recording profile about PCM 16,000 Hertz. And in this call, you can see we're using it. And what we've done is split the WAV file or the waveform by agent and customer on a peer-to-peer call. If it was a meeting, it would be the targeted user and other participants on the other media file. The uniqueness and the great feature is the ability to, for example, if two people are speaking and there's background noise on the other one and you can't hear what was said, or two people are shouting at each other, you can't hear what was said, you can mute either side and only listen to the other party. What's also important is just because you've created a link doesn't mean now there's a link in the ether and you can do whatever you want. There is a place to go to those shared calls and see what has been shared. Here you can see demo. It was Jordan's call. This was the date of the call. This is when the link was. That's when it will expire, and it was created by me, my account. Now I have the ability to say, oops, it was shared in by mistake. I'm going to now shut down the link, and now no one has access to it anymore. I can bring it up again as long as it hasn't expired. As soon as it expires, you no longer can access it. And when that link is valid, you have other features you can apply to that link when it's valid. And I can go also and search by links and see who's been sharing calls. And if I go back a couple of days now, I can see over here the users who have been sharing calls and why they've been sharing calls. And here you can see this one is a link that's still that is still alive, and this one here as well. So you're able to like shut that link down if you needed to shut it down. This one was expiring in 2033, which is quite a ways out. Now, Going back to the call listing page, I can again see the current day's worth of calls. And if I want to now go into that call in more detail, I would open that call in more details. I can see that call and access it because I have permission. I can use the mute on either side, but also because we're using transcription, I can see the transcription below. Now, what's nice about this is if we use the global search, we could find this, but now we can also search deeper into this call. So let's say I'm looking for the word respective. I can now type respective in here, and we found that sentence. And if I add volume, I don't believe I can, to this recording, so you can hear, if I click there, it's going to take me directly to that part of the call where it says this specific sentence. So that's a really interesting feature. The next one is activity log, where we're able to see like an audit trail on the call, who's played it back. If there's a reason for playback, you'd see that there. And then comments, where after the fact you can add a comment such as test, which doesn't need to be pinned. It's a searchable one, or you can pin it at a part of the call where you now have that pinned. And if I click that, I can see test, it was by that person, and it's a searchable note. Remember, I'm a root admin. I can come in and edit and delete it, but there are role permissions that can restrict people from editing it, deleting it, only viewing it, etc. We also have a priority where you can add that priority to the call and then have that a filter. And then two other things, legal hold, mentioned that in detail earlier, but you can place legal hold on a call at this place and then remove it, or you can request a delete. So we have a feature called call delete, which is a function of GDPR, which is a data protection rule in Europe, where clients can request their calls to be deleted. Historically, this has been a mission with companies, recording companies, because people would have to request it and you'd have to get access and figure out how to remove a call. In this case, you can make a role permission for a user to request a call's deleted. When a tenant is created, there's a field or a contact field called compliance officer, and that compliance contact then is the person who would approve or decline a deletion. So you would go call delete. I want to delete it because of whatever reason, confirm, and it starts a workflow. In fact, I can show you that. Let's do a workflow like that. So I'm going to quickly go back and share from yesterday because I can delete or request a deletion for one of my calls. So if I'm going back over here and I find this call over here, I'm going to open it in more details. And now I want to delete this call. I'm going to hit call delete and I'm going to go showing Mark and I'm going to go confirm. And I've now requested that this call is in a delete. I want to delete that call. So now what I can do is I'm going to get an email, which I will show you because I'm the compliance officer account for this as well. And that email, let's pull it across, is going to say, delete, hi, this is the compliance officer, please approve or reject the delete from, and it happens to be the same account because I'm doing both. Click here to view the call, and the reason why I asked was showing Mark, and I can listen to the call and either approve it or reject it. And let's say I choose to approve it. Okay, it's now going to open a window where I can now say, okay, I'm approving it because GDPR request, or I can decline it for whatever reason. I've now approved it, and if I go back in here, there will be an audit trail of that call being approved for delete. Now, having said that, let's go directly there. And I can go to the call deletion log where I can see today that there was a call that was from me. It was on this date. This account requested it. The reason for the request was that, and it was approved because it was a GDPR approved, and it's approved. Now, if I do nothing for 24 hours, this call is gone and deleted. I can go back into it and I can request it to be cancelled for deletion, where it just stays in the system. And I can go back in here and see historically and get a report on those calls that have been requested for deleted, approved, cancelled for deleted, or deleted. Now, if a call is deleted, this is the only remaining record of this call in the whole system. It appears nowhere else in the system. It can also be exported as an Excel report. The other features in here, as I mentioned, we have the call playback log, where you can go and see who's been playing back calls. And here you can see there's a call playback reason in that one showing the demo, and I can export that out as well. Please bear in mind there's an anonymous user in here as well, because when you share a call externally, you don't know who's playing it back. So typically customers use the playback reason so the person can type some sort of a name or something within that that field. Coming back over here, downloaded calls. If you'd hit the option to download a call, you would see that whole downloaded package within this space as well. That completes this piece of the demo. I'm going to log into a system with AD Sync so I can show you what that looks like. So we have a comprehensive view, and using the same mechanism, I'll wait for my one-time PIN. There we go. We've got it. And I'm going into the system. Now, some of the immediate differences that you're going to notice when AD Sync is on is when you go to users or to groups, you're going to see that you don't have the button to import or add. It says you cannot add because AD Sync is enabled. Now, same with group. When AD Sync is on, you'll have some credentials here which are used to create the enterprise app in AD or Entra to be able to do the sync. And once you've done that, and those groups that are added to that app in AD, those groups will be automatically imported into IXCloud. And then you can go and configure them. This is normally done on the first when the system's installed. So whether a group is a recorded group or not, what endpoint is used. Remember, the endpoint would be which integration or where it's connecting to, whether you want to give the users in the group the ability to play back their own calls, and then also those profiles that you can add or attributes, recording, retention, or security. Once you've added them and saved them, it will apply to the group. Now, syncing of the tenants happens once a day at midnight, and it will send the system contact when you're creating it. So there's a field again for a system contact, an email explaining what happened during the most recent sync. I can also sync by just clicking that button and see that report on the screen, which shows me if there were users added, any reactivated, any updated, any errors that might have occurred, if there were licenses not available. So you will get that. But when the automatic one happens once a day, there will also be a report sent to that system-based contact. Now, again, if I go to groups, you're going to see here as well, these groups are in and licensed, and I can see automatically users are added. I have no ability to add them. I can see which profiles are added. The only configuration you make here is the playback permissions, and if you want call play reason apply to a group. That pretty much summarizes everything. Thank you for the time.